Can you guys hear me? Okay. We're going to welcome Peter T. Lynn from Diamond Orchids, and he has come here from Southern California. He is an AOS judge. He grows orchids in 3 small greenhouses. He grows primarily mini cats, sophronitas, dendrobiums, and miniature species. That's about all I have, about you. But he's a real interesting person. I've already talked to him. And we welcome him, Peter Lynn.
All right, thank you so much for having me. I think this is my first time in Louisville. Tonight my talk is on what I call the 3 A's of the orchid world, and it's primarily on the class of orchids called Angraecoids. These are the 3 major genera are Angraecum, Eranthes, and Oranges. Can we have a little bit of the lights down? So what I'm going to review tonight is I'm going to give you an introduction to the family of Angraecoids. We'll look at Angraecums, and I'll talk a little bit about the culture, Eranthes, Oranges, and then we'll look at other related genera within the Angraecoid family. We'll look at some of the hybrids. There is some limited hybridization done within this group, and then at the end we can have some time for questions and answers. Although I do like to hold very informal talks, so if you happen to have a question about a particular slide or plant, just ask it then and we'll answer it at that time. So the Angraecoid family is composed of 2 sections. One is called Angraecinae, and it's composed of about 15 different genera and approximately 360 species. They occur mostly in the island of Madagascar and neighboring islands in Africa. So you'll see that the Angraecoids are all from a part of the world that's really not well known, not well visited, and that would be Madagascar and Africa. The second section is Arangidinae, and that's composed of 32 genera and about 330 species. And these occur mostly in Africa and some of them in Madagascar. So here's a map of Africa and Madagascar. So the population of Angraecoids is primarily on the east coast of Africa. And then here's Madagascar. These are neighboring islands such as Comoros, Reunion, and Mauritius. So the plant habit of these types of orchids, they're primarily epiphytes and lithophytes. Epiphytes mean that they grow among tree branches, tree trunks, and they basically grow in the air. Lithophytes are orchids that grow amongst rocks and rock outcroppings. And so they are mainly air-loving at the roots as well, but instead of growing on the trees, they grow along the rocks. They are what we call monopodial, which means they usually have a central growing point that goes up, so similar to a vanda or a phalaenopsis, as opposed to the second type of growth is sympodial, which is like a cattleya that has a rhizome that creeps along the ground, or not the ground, but the mount of the tree. They do sometimes branch, so even though they grow up, they may branch and form multiple growths. The roots are aerial, which means they are usually growing in the air or attaching themselves to tree branches, tree bark. They're covered in a spongy tissue called velamen, and that's what absorbs the water, and the water is absorbed through the velamen to feed the plant. The flowers can range from tiny to very large. The sepals and petals are often similar in shape and size, so a lot of the flowers will have a star-shaped form. The lip is almost always spurred or has a nectary that hangs underneath the lip. And at the tip of the spur, there's usually nectar, and that's what the pollinators are going after. Now, this family of orchids, the flowers are primarily white, and that's a general complaint about this family. It's like all the flowers are white. Can't we have some other colors? There are some green, yellow, and even bright orange species of flowers that are known. Many of them are floriferous, meaning they have many flowers on a spike, or they have many spikes per growth. And then many of them are fragrant. Now, because they have white flowers, they are usually pollinated by nocturnal insects, and so they're fragrant at night to attract those night-living insects. Okay, so the first genus is Angraecum, and it's a fairly large group of orchids. The king of the Angraecums is called Angraecum sesquipedale. This is also known as Darwin's orchid because Charles Darwin, when he saw this orchid in flower, he noticed that there is a 12-inch long nectary, and he postulated that there must be a moth that has a tongue that's 12 inches long in order to get the nectar that's at the end of each of the spurs. And it wasn't until several years after his death that they actually found a moth that did have a 12-inch long tongue. If you Google this particular orchid, there's actually a YouTube video showing someone who was able to capture the moth in flight in pollinating this particular orchid. It's a really fascinating video. So the flowers are very large. They can be 7 inches wide and tall. And as I said, they have a 12-inch long nectary here. They almost look like they're plastic or made out of wax. They are fragrant at night. And it usually blooms around Christmas time or into January. Sometimes it'll bloom in January. It's not a very small plant. The plants can get quite large. 3 feet tall, 2 feet wide is not uncommon. Now with these Angraecums, they really resent root disturbance. So you have to make sure that you're very careful in repotting these particular species. You only repot in active root growth, which is primarily in spring and maybe early summer. If you repot in the fall or winter when they're slowing down, they can really be set back, and they can sit there for several years before they start growing again. So you have to be very careful about repotting this particular species. The next one is Angraecum magdaleni. So we just saw the king of the Angraecums. This we call the queen of Angraecums. This is a smaller growing species. The flowers are smaller, but they're a little fatter. And there you see the spur there is much shorter. This plant grows about a foot tall and wide, and it grows very slowly. The flowers are very fragrant at night. They have a really lovely smell of jasmine, very sweet smell. There's a close-up of the flower. Now the Angraecums typically are medium light loving plants. I grow them with my Cattleyas, my Dendrobiums, and give the same amount of light to them. Temperature-wise, they usually like a temperature range of about 50 degrees at the low and 90, 95 in the day is okay for these. The next Angraecum is Eburneum. So this is actually an even larger plant than Sesquipedale. But they're showing you the flower spike. The flowers are what we call non-resupinate, which means they're upside down. The lip faces up, and then the sepals and petals hang down. And the spike, these plants can grow 3 or 4 feet tall. The spike can have 20, 25 flowers on them. There's also a few subspecies, Gyromi, Superbum, and Xerophyllum. There's another showing you the growth habit and the spike habit. Fragrant at night. So you do need quite a bit of space to be able to grow this. This is probably not one that you can grow inside the house. So best to have a greenhouse, or if you have a large basement that has, high pressure sodium lights, then you might be able to grow this one. Another sister species, Longicaucar, also a very large plant, 3 or 4 feet tall and wide. And this one has spurs that are about 14 inches long. So very dramatic when you see this in bloom. But again, you need a lot of space to be able to grow this one. This is Angraecum eichlerianum. There are a number of species that have sort of almost a vining type growth habit, and this is one of them. The flowers form at the nodes of the stem, and they typically hang down, and the flowers are green with a white lip, as you see here. Another vining type is Angraecum infungibilare. Really large lip. This flower, the lip is probably almost 3 inches long here. And it can grow quite tall, but is very slender in the width of the plant. Most of these Angraecums I grow in a bark mix in plastic pots. We'll see some later on that probably prefer to be mounted, like on a piece of cork or wood. So this is Angraecum leonis. This one has very attractive leaves. They're sickle-shaped leaves arranged in a fan, as you see here. And these are the flowers that come out. And it's a nice compact plant. They can grow over 1 foot wide, but they grow very slowly vertically. So you can grow this plant in a 6-inch pot for most of its life. Flowers are fragrant at night. They're about 2.5 inches wide. This is more of a miniature Angraecum. This is Dibiuri, widely available and pretty easy to grow. You can see it has very coarse roots. So this one can be grown in a pot, but you have to be very careful about watering. You don't want to overwater this particular plant. So a lot of people will grow this in an open basket or on a mount, such as cork or wood branch. Here's one that I've grown on a piece of cork. The flowers are quite large, as you can see here. They almost hide the plant behind it. Fragrant at night, again. Another dwarf Angraecum. This is Angraecum compactum. And there's the flowers there. This one is not as widely available, but sometimes the people will grow this in seed. I currently self this particular plant and have flasks of this, but they're really slow growing. They've actually been in my flasks for 2 years now, and they're still barely 1 inch tall. So they're very slow growing. But here's the same plant a few years later. That's growing in a 3-inch clay pot. So it's about 6 inches wide. Now, one of the reasons why I like the Angraecoides family of orchids is because they are not well known, and you don't see them very often. And that is because, orchids coming out of Africa, Madagascar, it's a part of the world that, it's not well traveled and it's not easily to get orchids out of those countries. So that's why I sort of like these things that are rare and unusual. So as I go through the talk, I'll mention some of the Angraecoides that are actually very rare. And if you can get them, they're usually very expensive. But at the same time, they're still nice to see, and hopefully will give you an appreciation for this family of orchids. This is Angraecum equitans. Another miniature. It grows the plant is probably about 4 or 5 inches tall. You can see it has some lovely white flowers. I grow this in a pot and I grow it mounted. But for this one, I actually feel it grows better in a pot because the roots are pretty fine and you have to have really good humidity if you want to grow this on a mount. This is Angraecum aloifolium, and this was one of the Gracoids that I call one of the holy grail orchids because it's so desirable but so hard to get. I was finally able to get a couple plants from Germany. A friend of mine and I did an import from a German vendor and was finally able to get this one. But it's a very tiny Angraecum that's barely, probably 3 inches wide here. And you can see the reason why they call it aloefolium is because the leaves look like a succulent, an aloe, very similar to an aloe. This is supposed to be coming from Madagascar on the warm and dry side of the island. This is another really tiny Angraecum species. This is called Ursianum. It's very hard to obtain, but there is a nursery in Montana called Botanica that has taken their life's work into reproducing some of these Angraecums, and they were able to produce these from seed. But here's the plant. The plant is about 1.5 inches wide, and look at that flowers. It's huge for the size of the plant. And then right now the spur is coiled up here. The next picture shows the spur, the flower is barely 1 inch wide, and this spur is 6 to 7 inches long. So quite amazing as you see this plant bloom. There's the plant right behind it. You almost can't see the plant at all because the flowers are so big. But really a special species. This is Angraecum distichum. This is probably a more popularly known species. It's been reproduced from seed. It has an unusual growth pattern. The leaves are alternately ranked along the stem. And the flowers are about 1/2 inch wide, and they can appear on the little stems any time of the year, although usually in the fall it seems to be the major bloom period. It's a cute little thing. You can grow mounted or you can grow in a pot as well. It has very fine roots, so sometimes it's better to have it in a pot. This is Angraecum dasycarpum. This is a picture off the internet. I don't know of anyone who has this in the U.S., but it's another miniature Angraecum with small white flowers. Angraecum florulentum. This one has been grown from seed as well. It has non-resuppinated flowers, again that are white. Angraecum scottianum, a dwarf Angraecum species. Flowers are upside down, like some of the others. Sometimes grown mounted, but I find, again, best grown in a pot for me. Angraecum germanianum. Flowers are upside down. The growths are usually pendulous, so this one grown in a mount or in a basket so that the stems can hang down. The flowers sort of remind me of an octopus or something with tentacles. There's a well-grown plant there with lots of flowers. So this plant is probably over 2 feet tall, just to give you some scale. This is Angraecum conchoglossum, similar species to geranium. Teretiifolium, a particularly rare species. The leaves look like pine needles, so it's very delicate. And then there's the flower that appears off the stem. Another pine needle type, this is linearifolium. This is Viguri, which is a really lovely species, and it's really special because the flowers are not just white, but they have a kind of a salmon brown tinge or blush to the flowers here. Here's a close-up of the flowers. So in terms of the Angraecums and their culture, the light is what I call medium light levels, so about 1,500 to 2,000 foot candles of light, and they need 8 to 10 hours of that bright light in order to grow and bloom well. Some of them, especially the miniatures, can be grown under lights fairly easily. Of course, the bigger ones are going to be a little more challenging. Temperature-wise, most of them are intermediate to warm growers. So I usually define a temperature range of about 50 at the low and maybe a 90, 95 at the high is sort of the ideal temperature range. They mostly can handle extremes on either side if it's just for a short period of time. Water-wise, most of them like to dry between watering, and it's best to use pure water source, so rainwater, distilled water, or if you have reverse osmosis treated water is good. Out in California, we have pretty hard water. We'll have 400 to 600 parts per million in our of stuff in our water, and you can tell you have hard water if you see white deposits, calcium deposits on the leaves after time of watering. That tells you have hard water. And especially if you have mounted plants, pure water is best because when the roots are exposed like that, the salts and minerals will actually tend to burn the roots after repeated use. In terms of fertilizer, the angraecoids are not heavy feeders, although they do appreciate some fertilizing in the water during the growing period, in the spring, summer, and fall. So I use a weak fertilizer solution with every watering if you can. If you can't do it with every watering, once or twice a month would be helpful during the growing season. In the winter, most of these orchids will slow down, and they really do not need a lot of fertilizer just because the light intensity, the duration of light is really slowed down, as well as usually the temperatures are cooler as well. In terms of pots, most of the larger species, like the first angraecums that I showed you, grow well in pots. Some of them prefer to be mounted, though. A lot of the pendulous ones like to be mounted, and then most of them dislike the root disturbance, so you have to be very careful about repotting the ones that are a little tricky. When you see the new roots forming at the base of the stem, or if you take the pot off and you see new roots, active root tips, then that is a good sign that it's okay to repot at that time. The major pests I find are mealybugs. They like to collect in the crevice of the new leaves where the growing point is. And then especially the thinner leaved angraecoids, they're liable to be attracted by spider mites, especially if your growing area does not have high humidity. So be on the watch out for that. Usually spider mites will create a stippling on the leaves, like a little white or gray striking on the leaves. And usually you can see them underneath the leaves. Sometimes they produce a little bit of webbing, but they are very, very tiny. But what you can do is you can get a white piece of paper, shake the leaf, and with your little orange dots on your paper, then you have spider mites. Okay, the next family, well, the next section of angraecoids is Eranthes. Most of the Eranthes have green flowers, they have very similar flower shapes. I find that the Eranthes are probably the least grown angraecoids between the three genera, but they have their own interesting characteristics. This is Longipes. Most of the Eranthes bloom along a very long, thin flower spike, and a lot of them are sequentially bloomers, so they'll open up one flower, the flower will drop, and another bud will form, and then it'll open and then drop. And it can happen for several months that the plants will continue to bloom. This is Eranthes ramosa. Even greener flowers are almost translucent green. And you see how the stem is super thin, and then there's a second bud here waiting to open after this particular flower drops.
Can you carry those?
I do carry a few of these. I don't have any with me, but I do have them in my at home. There's the flower. They look like green goblins or little green aliens. This is grandiflora. This has probably the largest flowers of the bunch. But again, I usually hang them up because then the flower spikes can hang down. This is Arantes caudata, Arantes parotii. There shows you the habit of this particular species. All these long spikes. These will bloom for many months. This particular species also has a peculiar thing of growing little plantlets at the ends of the spikes. And as those plantlets grow, they form their own roots. When they have 2 or 3 roots, I detach them and pot them up, and I have a little baby of the same plant. Yes?
How big is that plant?
So how big is this plant? This is one of those 5-inch net baskets. So that might give you a little bit of scale. This is probably 10 or almost 12 inches long. So most of the Arantes are fairly compact. They're not really space mongers, but you do need a little room for the spikes to hang down. This is a smaller one of the species. This is Arantes arachnides. The flowers are barely 3 inches wide. So for culture, these are low to medium light. So you can grow these in the same amount of light as a Phalaenopsis, 1,000 to 2,000 foot candles. Temperatures are again intermediate to warm. For these, they like to be kept moist. I usually grow them in pots. Their roots are very fine, but they do form really nice, vigorous root systems in the pot. And again, I say best to use pure water if you can. Fertilizer, same. We fertilizer with every watering during the growing period. Most of them do grow very well in pots or in baskets. You probably could grow these mounted, but again, you have to have really good humidity and you have to water all the time if you grow them mounted. Same kind of pest, using bugs and spider mites. Okay, the third major genus is Oranges. The first one I have is Oranges citrata. The nice thing about Oranges is most of the plants are dwarf to miniature. They have a similar growth habit as a Phalaenopsis with alternating leaves. This one's called citrata because it has kind of almost a lemon yellow shading to the flowers, as you see here. The flowers are not very big, they're only about 1 inch tall, but you can see they can form many, many flowers on the spikes. In each fan can put out 3 to 4 spikes in the plant. Every flower has its own little spur or nectarine. This is Oranges biloba. And look at the flower production on here. So this plant is about 5 inches wide, and this spike is over 12 inches long. This is a favorite. This is Oranges luteo alba variety rhodopschincta. Really long name for a small plant, but this plant is barely 4 inches wide, and it's putting out 2 spikes that are over 1 foot long. And this is the only species that has this red amber cap, as you see here. So it forms a really dramatic plant. Always people want to buy this when they see it in bloom. This one needs good humidity, and then most of the times it is mounted, although I do grow some in pots where there's very little bark in it, and most of the roots are just kind of sitting in the pot with some of the roots hanging out. This is Oranges fastuosa. This is a pretty widely available little miniature Oranges. It's different than some of the others where the flowers form very close to the base of the plant. They don't have long spikes at all. Here's a nicely grown one. The plant only grows about 3 inches wide, but it can put out a lot of flowers that are fragrant at night. This is a very small Aranjus species. This is Hyaloides. The plant is barely 2 inches wide. The flowers are about 1/4 of an inch wide. Aranjus modesta, star-shaped flowers, a nice compact species. Here's the plant habit. You can see as the fan gets bigger, it'll put up 3 or 4 spikes with about 20 flowers on each spike. Aranjus distincta, a very nice species that has really elegant flowers, very long nectary on it. This Aranjus likes to be mounted so that the roots can kind of be open to the air and it likes to dry out between the watering. This is a very grand species. This is Kochkiana. It's the only one that has a coiled spur. So those spurs, each spur has a coil in it like that. This is a widely available one. This is Aranjus mystacidii. Very compact growing. The leaves are about 4 inches wide. This is a larger growing Aranjus. This is spiculata. The flowers kind of look like birds in flight. A very tiny Aranjus. This is punctata. And again, the flowers are larger than the plant itself. This one's all usually grown mounted. It has very, very coarse roots that don't like to be contained in a pot. This is Aranjus harriotiana. Used to be called Microturangus, used to be called Chimangus. I think they finally landed on it being an Aranjus, even though it doesn't look very much like an Aranjus. It has orange flowers though, so there's something special about it. You can see the flowers are really tiny, but it can produce a lot of flowers for the size of the plant. So Aranjus culture, these are usually low light plants, and I have them at 800 to 1500 foot candles. They will bloom in Phalaenopsis light, or even a little less in some cases. Temperatures are usually intermediate to warm again. For watering, let dry between watering. You don't want to rot the roots. And especially if they're grown in pots, you have to be very careful about watering. Make sure you don't water the crown, because if water sits in the crown, you might have some fungal issues and lose the crown. So for these plants, I usually water in the morning so they're not wet, sitting wet at night. Being wet at night is usually the most opportune time for fungal problems, bacterial problems to occur. Fertilizer, same, weak fertilizer with every watering. In terms of pots, most species do prefer to be mounted, but some will do fine in pots. But a lot of them like to be either mounted or in a basket where the roots can kind of grow out into the air and be free of any kind of media. The primary pests for Aranjus are mewbugs. So now we go into some related genera. These are the lesser known genera, although they're not necessarily less beautiful. Some of them are very rare and very hard to obtain, but nonetheless they're still very beautiful. This is Uricone rothschildiana. The leaves very much look like a Phalaenopsis. They have a nice wavy look to them, but the flowers are very unlike Phalaenopsis. They're held close to the base of the plant, and they're green. They're white with a green shadowing, and then the lip is got a very deep green center. This blooms in the summertime, usually around July, and the flowers have a nice spicy fragrance. They smell like cloves, cinnamon smell. It is definitely a warm grower. I have problems with this if I let the temperatures go below 60 degrees. So this one might be a good one to grow inside the house under lights where it can be kept on the warm side. Another sister species, this was another one that I considered as a holy grail in Gracoid because it was so rare and so hard to obtain. Along with the other Angraecum aloifolium, I was able to import a couple of these from Germany, but my friend in Hawaii has now grown this from seed, so it's become a little bit more easy to obtain. The flowers are salmon colored, as you see here, and not very big, only about an inch wide, but you can have a spike that has 10 to 15 flowers on a spike. Now we go to some of the leafless Angraecoids. There are a number of species that are leafless, meaning they have roots, flowers, but no leaves. And they're quite unusual. This one is called Corallina because the flowers have a coral center, as we see next. And you might ask, well, how does a plant make food for itself if it has no leaves? Well, you'll notice that the roots have a green cast to them. There's actually chlorophyll in the roots, and it's especially evident after you water them. They turn green, basically, showing you that they do make food off of the roots. So for leafless orchids, you would never pot them. You would never cover the roots because that is their way of collecting food for the plant. So the leafless ones are either mounted or sometimes I simply place them on an upturned basket and they just sit on the basket and the roots just grow in the air. Some of them can be very easy to grow because they just need to be watered every few days and they're happy. And repotting is never a problem because they don't need to be repotted. This is Microcelia exilis. Kind of a unusual leafless, not very showy, but very interesting root pattern. You know, it's a nice sight to behold when you see all those roots. Here are the flowers. They're very tiny, not very showy at all. But an interesting leafless species for collectors. One of my favorites in the group is Microcelia stoltzii. And this is one that just grows in an empty basket. No bark, no moss, no nothing. Super easy to grow for me. And then it has pretty showy flowers. They're white. And the plant grows from a central crown, but then it forms basal offsets that make a big clump. In fact, this particular plant is a division of another plant with a cultivar name of Kathy Fenwick's Medusa, because it looks like a head of snakes. This is a third Holy Grail orchid, Angraecoid. This is Microcelia gilpini. Extremely rare, very hard to obtain, and so desirable because the flowers are bright orange. I mean, that's so rare in the Angraecoids. Leafless again, you can see there's the crown of roots here, and then the flower cluster in the middle that are bright orange. Luckily, I have a friend in Louisiana that is growing this from seed, so soon plants will be available to this as well. Now you might ask, well, what is this stuff that's hanging around it? These are not roots. You can see here, these are the roots here, the little wider roots. This is just simply Spanish moss, the Tillandsia bromeliad that grows, I'm sure even down south on the trees. It's an air plant, and what we do is to help with the humidity and the moisture, we drape some of the live moss around the mount. When we water the plant, we water the Spanish moss as well, and then it slowly will evaporate and provide some moisture to the roots without rotting the roots. If we were to use the sphagnum moss, which holds a lot of water, that would simply rot the roots. So this is an interesting method to give some of your heavy rooted plants additional moisture and humidity. Occasionally you have to prune back some of the roots because the Spanish moss can be vigorous and it can eventually smother the plant. So after a few months, I try and thin out the moss. But there's a close-up of the flowers. Really, really neat when you see this. Now this is some orchids that are native to South Africa. This is Mycosidium capense. It's called capense after the Cape. It's a very nice species, pretty widely available because it's easy to reproduce from seed. And it only grows about 4 to 5 inches across, and it can have many, many spikes of flowers that are fragrant at night. Almost always grown mounted. The roots do not want to be contained in a pot. There's the flower close up. They're star-shaped, each with its own nectary. And as the plant gets bigger, it can really produce a nice shower of flowers. This is a little-known Mycosidium. I do not know anyone in the U.S. that has this, but this is Caphrum, a really small species. Mycosidium venosum, which is very similar to capense, a little smaller. The leaves are smaller, and it blooms in the winter. Capense blooms around May or June, so that's how you can tell the difference between the two. Another little-known Mycosidium, this is Pusillum. Pusillum meaning tiny, so it is one of the smallest of the bunch. Look at the copious roots here. It's almost leafless. It may have a few tiny leaves at the crown, but it's primarily leafless. Mycosidium gracili, also almost leafless, just a few leaves, green flowers. Mycosidium bourboni. This I've reproduced from seed, and it can be quite floriferous. It has more roots than it has leaves, and I think this next picture shows you a specimen plant. Really beautiful. Later on, we'll see a hybrid between capense and bourboni. This is Rangeris almaniensis. Almost looks like a vanda in its growth habit, but then it has the Angraecoid type flowers. This is Aeonia rosea, really special Angraecoid. Look at the flower color, green sepals and petals, white lip with a red center. This is one of the vining types, very, very small, maybe only 2 inches wide, but it'll grow a couple feet tall. It roots as it attaches, just like a vine. I have tried to grow this plant and have not succeeded, primarily because it does need really good humidity. Most of the roots are along the stem, and so you can't really grow it in a pot because there's not going to be any roots at the base. So I'm trying to grow some of these from flask and hope they adapt better than some of the other plants that I've tried that were more of an import from Madagascar.
How do they grow in the wild?
How do they grow in the wild? They grow amongst the brush and the tree, the small trees. So they start off near the ground and then they just vine up and kind of vine through the canopy of the brush. This is Gypsolopsis erecta, very unknown kind of species. This is Podangus dactyloceras. Podangus is after the word foot. That's because there's a foot-shaped part of the flower. But it has an interesting fan of leaves like this. And then the flowers are almost translucent, as you see here. You can almost see right through them. This is Critopus elatus. Really unusually shaped flowers. Also kind of a vining type of Angraecoid. Tridactyl tanneri. Small green flowers, not really showy, but an interesting botanical species. This is Certorchis. There are a number of Certorchis varieties, and they come from Africa, some from South Africa. This one, Prater Vista, is from South Africa. This is another one that I consider a holy grail orchid. For the longest time, I could not find this anywhere. And then I finally found a plant nearby, actually, in Santa Barbara, at the Santa Barbara Orchid Estate. They were selling a couple divisions of a plant that they had for many, many years. So I was able to get this plant. As soon as it flowered, I selfed it, and then I now have seedlings of it that are actually bloom size now. This one is very special because of the fragrance at night. It has a gardenia smell, jasmine smell, really powerfully fragrant at night. A nice compact grower. That's a 4-inch wood basket, so it's not a big grower at all. There's the star-shaped white flower. This is another rare variety of Certorchis. This is Arcuata variety Whitey-Eye. I also self this plant and have seedlings of this now. It's a very slow grower. It doesn't get very big, but it has nice star-shaped flowers that are fragrant at night. Here's a close-up of the flowers. Another Certorchis, this is Chayuana. It has the largest flowers of the Certorchis. And then Sobenicophea robusta. Named robusta because it's a very robust, vigorous plant. You can see the flowers there. Very attractive. And then the rarer of the two species of Sobenicophea is Humbertiana. Similar flowers, a little bit more open growth habit. The flower spikes are more vertical than robusta. So this plant is about 2 feet tall and about 1 foot wide, so it's a medium-sized plant. There's a close-up of the flower. Okay, so hybrids. There are some hybrids, but because the Angraecoids were very hard to obtain, there wasn't much hybridizing done with them because nobody had the parents to make hybrids with. But there were a few. Hoosiers, which is now out of business, did a lot of hybridizing. They had originally purchased many of their plants from Fred Hillerman, who had a nursery called the Angraecum House out in California, but he's gone now too. So there's not a whole lot of being done with hybridization right now. But this is a hybrid between Aranjus and Uricone. So we got the best of both worlds here. We have larger flowers, but we have that nice salmon color coming from the Uricone. This is Aranjus Liliana Rossi, and it's a hybrid of Distincta with biloba. This was a hybrid made in Germany or Europe somewhere. Aranjus Elro, this is a hybrid made in South Africa. Very floriferous. A little bit of a larger growing Aranjus hybrid. Another hybrid from South Africa is Aranjus Mir. This plant is probably at least 18 inches wide, so it's one of the larger growing hybrids. This is Aranjus Rob's Angry Birds. This is a hybrid between Bucheriana and Mysticidii. Look at the number of flowers on here. It inherits the wavy leaves from the Bucheriana. Here's the same plant a couple years later. All that's coming from one fan of leaves. And that's 18 inches long. This is Aranjus Winter Snow. This is a hybrid using Aranjus fastuosa. So we have really nice, chunky, round, white flowers. Aranjus LOC Cardinal Gem. This is a hybrid between Rhodostichta and Mysticidii. And Rhodostichta is the one that has the little red anther cap. So the hybrid maintains that colored anther cap, pollen cap, which is nice. This is Angraecum Gem Star. This is a hybrid made by Hoosiers. nice miniature hybrid. That's growing in a 3-inch pot. Look at the number of flowers on there. Angraecum Joy Stewart. This is a hybrid between a tiny, little-known species called Angraecum cucullatum by Angraecum scottii. Again, those are 3-inch pots there. Really cute flowers. This is Angraecum lemferti White Beauty, an older hybrid between the king and the queen of Angraecums. So Sesquipedale crossed with Magdaleni. And it's a really nice hybrid because you get a smaller plant with really nice sized flowers. Very fragrant at night.
Was those red or pot?
These are potted. This is Angraecum crestwood, red tomorrow star. This was made famous at the Taiwan show where it received an FCC and a CCE, a Certificate of Cultural Excellence. Look at this thing. That plant is about 4 feet tall. Those flowers are 6 inches wide. And look at the number of flowers on there. Just beautiful hybrid. There's also a caloric mutation of this clone. If you look closely, there are actually 3 spurs per flower. And this is what the flower looks like when it opens. So kind of an oddity, but still a novelty mutation. This is a hybrid of Floriulentum by Hibernium. This has been named Angraecum Shooting Stars. Nice compact plant. There's a close-up of the flowers. This is Floriulentum by Didierii. And then there's a few hybrids between Angraecums and Eranthes. This is Grandalina. So you can see some of the spidery and the green color coming from the Eranthes. This one is Angraecum pterodactyl. I named this hybrid because I got an award on this. So this is a hybrid between Eranthes grandiflora and that supersized Angraecum superbum. This is Angraecum threadhillerman, Angraecum grandalina by Angraecum leonis. And then I mentioned the hybrid between Mystidium campens and Mystidium bourboni. I happened to make this hybrid about 6 years ago, and when I made it, I was so excited because I thought I'll be the first to make a Mystidium hybrid. After I made the seed, I just happened to look it up in the registry and found out the hybrid was already made back in the 70s, and they named it Neil McCormick. So I was a little disappointed that I wasn't the first to make the hybrid, but when these bloomed, I was really pleasantly surprised. I got the best of both worlds. Campens has longer, more widely spaced flowers. Bourboni has more flowers, but they're really bunched up and held close together. And so this is a first bloom seedling, which doesn't really show you the potential, but here's the same plant the year after. And you can see how small it is. It only is about 3 inches wide. And then the third year, this is what it looked like. So I was really happy with this hybrid. So I've already remade the hybrid as well. Photo credits. A lot of the photos were mine, but I had some friends that supplied photos. Lawrence Grobler, Eric Hunt, and many more. If you want to learn more, there's actually an Angraecoid Alliance Society. It's primarily an web-based society. They have a website called angraecoids.org. And of course, I'd always recommend, if you're not a member of the American Orchid Society, there's membership to that society. They publish Orchids magazine every month. And in fact, Brenda Obiad of Botanica has published several articles on these Angraecoids in the magazine. We can have the lights up, and do you have any questions I might be able to answer for you?
I was wanting to ask, how do you combat mealybug on so many tiny leaves and
Yeah.
roots?
So the question is, how do you combat mealybugs on all these little tiny plants? Well, I do resort to using insecticides. You know, there are other non-toxic methods using alcohol or something like that, but that's very tedious because you have to like touch each insect in order to kill them. So more of a wide range insecticide is better to do that. Now with a lot of these insects, you may kill some of the adults, but there's emerging babies or juveniles that will come. So usually I have to spray 3 times 1 week apart to really get them. And then even after that, I have to be vigilant to say, is there another outcrop of the insects? Because a lot of these insects will hide in the very center of the leaf axil. Some of them can be in the roots in the pot. So even though you're spraying the plant and you're killing a lot of them, some of them might be hiding from you. So you got to be diligent in spraying. Yes?
Orangus hyaloides has a reputation of being short-lived. Is
Yes.
that a myth?
The question is, Orangus hyaloides has a reputation for being short-lived. There are a number of orchids that are what we call twig epiphytes, meaning they're really small orchids and they usually grow on little twigs of the branches, and they're reported to be short-lived. I would say yes and no. I have killed my fair share of Orangus hyaloides. I don't know if it's because they are short-lived or that, you know, sometimes they just lose vigor and they die. But a lot of these orchids that do die, you know, they do try and form seed and they reproduce from seed in nature. The biggest cause of the death of some of these is usually due to rot. So, you know, I have to be very careful with watering these tiny little miniature things. And temperature extremes can also stress the plants out. So you gotta try and be a little bit more delicate with some of these tiny little miniature things. So short-lived nature is partly true, I think, but you can combat that if you have, you know, really good culture and a good environment for them.
Well, are there any that are particularly robust of the ones of the Orangus?
Some of the larger growing ones, I think, are much longer lived. Some of them are much easier, like Mysticidii, Biloba. They seem to be much easier to grow. Some of the other ones, like Kochtiana, I did show Radicchii, Coriacea. Some of those are actually grown in a warmer, drier part of Madagascar in Africa. So some of them you have to read up on and make sure you're being very careful with the watering on those. Some of them like a dry period in the winter. Yeah.
Do the Orangus have the problem with root disturbance? I mean, the issue with...
Yeah, the question is, do the Orangus have problem with root disturbance? I would say not as much as some of the large Angraecum species, and that's primarily because most of them are grown mounted, right? So if they're grown mounted, you know, repotting is not really necessary. You know, I do get questions about what do you do when you have a mounted plant that's gotten too large for the mount, or the mount itself is starting to break apart? So what I do there is I will get another piece of bark or wood or whatever piece of thing you want to mount it to. I'll take the original plant and just tie it to the new piece of bark, and then eventually those roots will just grab onto the new piece, and then the old piece will just disintegrate or break apart and fall away. And hopefully by that time your plant is rooted to the new piece. The same with baskets. If you have a plant in a basket, you know, you can't remove those roots because they're probably firmly attached to the basket. So all I'll do is I'll put that basket in a bigger basket and let the roots just grow on top of it. So, you know, there's very little root disturbance in those two methods. Yeah?
I'd like to ask about Andrecum sesquipedale.
Sesquipedale,
I
yes.
have one that's been sitting in a pot forever. What do I do to it? Put it in the basket?
Well, is it not growing in the pot, or?
It's just sitting there
Just
looking
sitting
at me,
there?
and I bet it hasn't bloomed in 10 years.
So the question is, she has an Angræcum sesquipedale that has not bloomed in the pot.
And I got lovely pictures of it when it did. you know.
Oh, so it has bloomed before, it just
Yeah.
hasn't bloomed in a while. Can be a tough question without seeing the plant and where it's growing in. Sometimes the plants can be a little stubborn, and if you change the environment somehow, if you move it to either a little bit brighter location, sometimes plants, if they
What
get...
about the airflow?
Yeah, the airflow
Good or bad?
is good.
Good?
Most orchids appreciate some air circulation to, because they don't like stagnant air. So,
I kept it and put it in the basket and tried.
you can try that, yeah. Anytime you have a plant that doesn't do something, you might change something about the way you're growing it, and that may shock the plant. Sometimes if you yell at it and say, I'm going to throw you out, sometimes that works too. So, any other questions? Yes?
I've had a citrata for years.
Citrata?
And it would make spike after spike after spike after spike, but they never would get flowers on them.
They never, I'm sorry?
Wouldn't get flowers. They would send out all these spikes, but then the flowers would never develop off the spikes.
So her question is on Arangis citrata, her plant does form spikes, but it doesn't flower.
Oh.
So sometimes the buds will blast and never form properly, and that usually is due to a change in its environment. Either it got maybe too cold or too hot. A lot of times if the humidity drops, then you're liable to get bud blast. Plants, when they're stressed, the flowers and the buds are the first to go. They're going to put all their energy into the plant and the roots, and the buds are expendable. So if you're having a plant that blasts the buds and they don't form properly, something about your environment is not happy for the plant. And it might be just lower humidity levels. Citrata tends to bloom in the winter, so I don't know if it gets really dry if you're growing in the house.
It does because we're growing inside, and I do lose humidity. I'm lucky to get over 50% of it.
Yeah, so you might try and put it into a terrarium type of environment while it's forming its spikes. That might help. Yeah. Okay. Anything else?